You know, Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolon Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
On the Jordan Harbinger Show, you'll hear amazing stories from people that have lived them, from spies to CEOs, even an undercover agent who infiltrated the Gambino crime family. You're about to hear a preview of the Jordan Harbinger Show with Jack Garcia, who did just that.
My career was 24 out of 26 years was solely dedicated working undercover. Now I walk in, I'm in the bar. Now there's a barmaid there, good-looking young lady. She's serving me a drink. Hey, what would you like? Usually my drink was give me a Kettle One martini, 3 olives, glass of water on the side. I finish the drink. The guys come in. I'm gonna go in my pocket, take out the big wad of money. Bam! I give her $100. If you're with the mob, I say, hey Jordan, you're on record with us. That means we protect you. Nobody could shake you down. We could shake you down, but you're on record with us.
For more on how Jack became so trusted in the highest levels of the Gambino organization, check out episode 392 of The Jordan Harbinger Show.
I'm Brett,
And I'm Alice.
and we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we continue our look at the Leo Schofield case. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my chilly co-host, Alice.
What should we do? We should just record with our kids running around in the background.
There you
What do
go.
think?
There you go. If you see one just run by, you'll know that was the problem.
You'll know that school continues to be canceled and it continues to be chilly here.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think a lot of you are going through that right now. Hopefully, by the time you hear this, school won't be canceled anymore, and your sanity will have returned.
Exactly. So we measure coldness in our house by how cold is it in Alaska. If you guys were with us in the podcast last year, we went dog sledding in winter in Alaska, and it was such a scarring experience for my kids that they measure all temperatures to, is it dog sledding in Alaska cold? The answer's no, it's
That sounds
not.
about right.
But it is chilly.
It's definitely not that cold.
Definitely
It's
not that cold. It was negative 12, so we're not there yet.
I've told some of the people who listen to the gallery about this, but we went to Harbinger, China once, where they have this ice festival, and they build the city out of ice. So we always measure it by that. Also not that cold. Not that cold. But still cold. Still cold. So, anyway. All right, well, we are back to talk more about Leo Schofield. This is episode 4, episode 6 for Alice, who recorded her mystery 2 episodes with someone else in some other universe or something. We're still not exactly sure what happened there. But for those of you listening at home, this is episode 4, and we've gotten through the timeline, and we've sort of gotten into the trial. And today we really are going to start digging into the evidence in this case in what we know. Basically, all you know now is there's a timeline. There's some dispute about what happened. The timeline's important. And we went through what was a huge chunk of the trial, a surprisingly large amount, which was all about the relationship between Leo Schofield and his wife, Michelle, before she was murdered. And it did not paint a good picture of Leo or what he was like as a husband or what their relationship was like. And the prosecution, having now laid this foundation, which is basically Leo is a violent guy, now wants to put some evidence behind that. Obviously, the fact that Leo's a violent guy doesn't mean he killed his wife. The fact that they had a volatile relationship doesn't mean he killed his wife. But it gets the jury a long way there. And now what the jury is looking for is some proof to go along with that. And we're going to talk about a lot of that in today's episode and whether or not it holds up or not. So, Alice, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of what Brett just said is, even though you can't say it explicitly, the purpose of going into kind of the horrific, violent nature of Leo's relationship with Michelle is to essentially put in the jurors' minds, he's capable of doing something like this. And they can't say that out loud, and that's not the way you're supposed to convict. But like Brett says, we are all people who are trying to understand the chaos around us. And we said this a lot in the Murdaugh trials when people said, how can a man who seemingly loves his son shoot him and kill him, right? That did a lot of work for people, that they felt like Alec Murdaugh was a person who couldn't do that, and they had to get over that hump. Well, this jury has gotten over that hump with Leo, with all of the devastating testimony that has been put on as to how Leo has been incredibly violent to Michelle. And the reason they have to do this is because Michelle was brutally murdered. You guys all know I am not a fan of gory stuff, kind of sensationalized murders at all. I don't like watching that on TV. I don't like reading about it. It's not something I enjoy learning about. But in a case, especially in trial, the autopsy report is so important because the murder victim is not there to testify. They cannot tell you about the horrific last moments of their lives, but the autopsy can tell you so much about what they went through and what motivated the perpetrator to do the things that they do. And so we're going to look at Michelle's autopsy, which was, of course, talked about at length at trial. And this is hard to hear. Michelle was stabbed to death. She suffered at least 26 stab wounds. She was stabbed in the chest, and she had multiple stab wounds in her neck. She also had stab wounds, this is really devastating, on her back. And why is that sad? Because when you're stabbing someone in the back, they are most likely helpless. Several of these wounds would have been fatal. Now, the pathologist testified that there would have been a lot of blood loss. You can imagine 26 stab wounds to things like the chest, where your aortas are, where your neck is being stabbed. There's a lot of precious blood flow there going up to your spine, your neck, your brain. And the pathologist said that she would have lost something like 5 pints of blood. That's about 2.5 liters. And the blade itself would have been at least 6 inches long to do the type of damage that she saw on Michelle's body. The pathologist also testified that it was likely that the first stab wounds were to her back. Now, these wounds likely would not have been fatal. And this is important because if those are the first stab wounds, it indicates that she is not the aggressor, that she may not even have known this attack was coming if her back was to her attacker. So oftentimes, if you see the first stab wounds to the front, you may see hands kind of try to defend themselves. That may indicate the victim knew that the attack was coming. But being stabbed in the back, I mean, truly she was blindsided, if that's true. And again, because they were to her back, they wouldn't have killed her. So if this had been, say, a quick robbery and someone stabbed her in the back, grabbed her purse and ran, she probably would have survived. But the pathologist said that at some point, the murderer stabbed her in the back at first, but then turned her over to finish the job, stabbing her in the front. And those stabs were fatal. Now, sometimes when you look at the way stab wounds go in, you can tell if the attacker is left or right-handed. But because of the state of her body and the sheer number of stabs, the pathologist said that they could not determine the handedness of the attacker. And this part is also really important and interesting. Michelle had no drugs or alcohol in her system, and there was no evidence of rape. And that's important because you want to know kind of why is this person being attacked? You know, what's the impetus? Is it robbery? Is it rape? When you have a young woman, especially like Michelle, who's 18 years old, you can imagine that might be right at the top of an investigator's mind, that rape may have had something to do with it. But there's absolutely no evidence of that. And once she was stabbed to death, or she may have been barely alive, but she was well on her way to passing away, there's evidence of dragging from wounds on her back. Now, this is also consistent with the fact that if she was stabbed in the back first, she was turned over to finish the stabbing in the front, and that's where she was left to perish. And as she was laying on her back, completely exposed after these 26 stab wounds, she's now being dragged because you can tell from the marks on her back. Now, because of the nature of her wounds, the amount of decay, because she was missing and wasn't found for several days, and the coolness of the canal, this is in February, the pathologist determined that it had not been very long after she was killed that she was placed in the canal. In fact, the pathologist testified that she was probably dead for 5 or 10 minutes before she was put into the canal. On cross-examination, the pathologist noted that there had been a number of young women in the area who had been stabbed to death and placed in canals.
So, a lot of really interesting things that Alice just brought up. Number one, the amount of blood. I mean, that is so much blood. I hope everyone appreciates exactly how much that is. 2.5 liters, 5 pints. That's more than half a gallon. If you don't think that's a lot, grab a milk jug, pour out half of it on your floor, and then clean it up. I mean, that's how much blood she would have lost. And so you're going to expect to see a lot of blood somewhere. Most likely wherever she was killed. As we know, you lose most of your blood right after you're stabbed. Because at some point, your heart's going to stop pumping. And then there will still be blood, but it's not pumping out of you with the same force as it would be right after you were stabbed. The other thing that's interesting, and I'm not sure, the pathologist doesn't really give a lot of explanation about how he knows this. The 5 to 10 minutes after she died that she was put into the canal. I'm not sure how he knows that. I don't know if that is... There's lots of different things pathologists can use when they're looking at bodies, whether it's insects or the way you decay. So I'm not sure how he knows that. But I think it's a pretty important thing, and it sort of just slides by if you read the transcript. They don't spend a whole lot of time on it at all. And then, obviously, on cross-examination, what's the defense trying to do? They're trying to introduce a little bit of doubt. That's all they have to do. They don't have to show who did it. They don't have to show that Leo didn't do it. They just need it to be reasonable for the jury to think there's another possibility out there. And one thing they're pointing to is this is a pretty violent area. And there are a lot of attacks on young women. And some of them are stabbed, some of them are strangled, some of them are beaten to death, but bodies have been found in this area. And that's something that the defense really wants to focus on, to try and say, look, whatever you might think of Leo, there's a really good chance that in the middle of the night, Michelle ran into the wrong person, and that's how she ended up dead, not because of anything Leo did.
And, you know, these things, we're going to revisit them, but a couple things are already coming into view as to who was the perpetrator and where Michelle was killed. That's a lot of blood. And you're going to leave that trace of blood somewhere. And at least we've been told in the reports that there was a lot of blood by the canal. And if, in fact, she was put into the canal just 5 or 10 minutes after she'd been stabbed, that's not a lot of time to... I don't know if you've moved a not conscious body before, but it's kind of difficult to move them into a car, to move them around, especially if there's blood everywhere. And we're going to dive into where blood was or where blood wasn't. But a lot of things are indicating that she was stabbed very close to where she was dumped.
Alice has a lot of experience in moving dead bodies around, so she knows. Alice, when Alice speaks...
That's for our Q&A at another time. I have a lot of experience moving around a very sick child who refuses to move, who is like a fraction of how much Michelle weighed, and I know how hard that is.
You would be surprised. If those of you who have kids, the 4-year-old, when they don't want to move or they're just dead weight because they're not going to help you, really heavy. And Michelle would have weighed, she didn't weigh that much. I mean, she was a small person, but she would have weighed twice as much as your average 4-year-old. And as we talked about, there were drag marks, right, where the murder happened. And that would indicate that whoever did this, couldn't just pick her up. There was a little bit of difficulty there. So let's kind of go back to the timeline. We talked about this some when we talked about it before, but I think it's important to remember that based on the timeline at trial and the prosecution's theory, if true, the murder had to have occurred between 1:15 a.m. when Leo left Vince's house and 4:30 when he returned to Buddy Anderson's house. From that point forward, he's with Buddy Anderson, and he couldn't have really done it. So he has that 3 hours and 15 minutes to pull this off. The murder, the dumping of the body, the dumping of the car, it all had to happen in that time span. And while Leo might have had the car at some point when he was dumping it, he also would have had to have walked some during this period, and he didn't have the car the entire time. He obviously also had to switch to the truck later on or catch up with his father and his mother because he has an alibi to create. As we talked about when we went through the timeline, there are a lot of different moments where Leo is seen in the truck talking to various people. Michelle's father, police officers, that sort of thing. So a lot has to go on within this 3 hours and 15 minutes. But the timeline is probably even tighter than that. Go back to Michelle's father, David Somm. He's going to testify that Leo knocked on his window at 2:30 in the morning to tell him that Michelle was missing, and that when this happened, Leo had been in the truck. The prosecution will eventually speculate that by this point, Michelle was dead. So that means she was killed and Leo disposed of the body or switched cars with his dad between 1:15 and 2:30, leaving time for him to then go to his father's house, get the truck, and go see David Somm. So lots happening. It's not as if this is an impossible timeline. It's not, but it's a tight timeline. And it also doesn't leave a lot of time for things like cleaning up, which I think is going to become more and more important as we talk more about the case.
So let's talk about the dump location, because Michelle's body was found near the intersection of Interstate 4 and Highway 33, just off of Highway 33. I know you guys who are watching this live absolutely love our use of maps, and here it is again. But if you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing the map. I think this is very helpful to know where everything is, because where Michelle's body was dumped is an area that's heavily wooded. But that doesn't mean it was completely kind of an untouched place. It was wooded, meaning that teenagers would like to go there, drink, have sex, get high, kind of do the things that their parents probably are not allowing them to do. So in other words, it's heavily wooded, but not untraveled. And it is a place that people go to have some privacy, to do things that they shouldn't be doing. And the reason that these teenagers can kind of go here to get high and hook up is because it's really easily accessible. And because of all this, it happens to be a really good place to dump a body. So if you're looking at this map, you can see that everything is relatively close together, but it begins to tell somewhat of a story. So if you're looking at this map, kind of the middle of this map is the Schofield's trailer. You see Alice Scott is right next to them because she can see into their yard, their driveway, not driveway, just kind of pulling up into their trailer. And you'll see that Sparky's, where Michelle made the call to Leo, is just south of where their trailer is. So she didn't have a phone at her trailer, but she didn't have to go too far. Now, what's interesting is she had to go south in order to make the call. And where she was supposed to go was to, I think, Buddy's house, but then it changed to Jimmy Rayner's house? Both of those locations, they're close to each other. So whether she was originally going to Buddy's house or to the Rayner house, it is to kind of the northwest corner. Her body is actually found directly north on that big road where Sparky's and the restaurant she worked at is. And then her car is found in the opposite direction of the Andersons' home and the Rayners' home.
And I think it's worth looking at the map. Like I said, this is not a huge area, but it's several miles between all these different sites. And if you kind of look at the map and then look at the timeline, you realize that there's a lot of sort of going back and forth across the whole area that we're looking at for whoever did this. Well, if it's Leo, let's say if it's Leo, because he has to be at his trailer, which is basically in the middle. It's in the middle of everything. So her body is found a few miles to the north of where his trailer is. As Alice said, Sparky's is probably a mile or so south of where his trailer is. David Som's house is more miles to the south. Like if you look at that big road that Alice was talking about, his trailer is essentially in the middle between where Michelle's body is found and where David Som's house is, which he went to. His parents' house is way up next to Buddy Anderson's house and Vince Raynor's house. And then the car is found almost completely out of this area altogether on the interstate. So there's a lot of, if you think that he murdered her, dumped the body, dumped the car, got the truck, went to David Som's house and sort of went all over the place, there's a lot of back and forth that's happening in this time. I mean, however much time he had to do this, he's using it all because he had to use it to travel through all these different locations. So let's talk about the finding of the body. This is an elephant in the room, especially for the prosecution. And it was the finding of the body that was one of those things. We talk about this sometimes. The one piece of evidence that it's really hard to get past, that sticks in your mind and really makes you think this person is probably guilty. And for the prosecution, the finding of the body was huge because the body was found by Leo Schofield Sr. And guilty or innocent, the finding of the body by his father was terrible luck for Leo. Now, the Schofields had been looking for Michelle along with some friends since she went missing, and they had done a pretty thorough search, an almost grid-like search, looking at all the different areas between where they knew she had been and they knew where she was going. And they're sort of moving north as they do this, and they're looking in ditches, and they're looking in creeks, and they're looking in all these places. Leo Sr. will testify that he was stopping and looking in water culverts, testifying he stopped probably 50 times. Certainly an exaggeration, but nevertheless, an idea of this search. The morning they're looking for the body, it turns to afternoon, they're still looking. As Leo said, this was a pretty depressing thing because the assumption, if you're doing this, is you're looking for a body. As he said, you're not going to find her in a canal just hanging out, right? Like what they are doing is looking for her remains and hoping that the police, over here will find her alive somewhere as they are still searching for her. So it turns to mid-afternoon. And at this point, Leo's father is looking for Michelle down a road, which turns out to be the road. It was an area that they had not searched yet, and Leo Sr. testified that he had a terrible headache that day. And at the further down the road he went, the worse the headache got. And it got so bad that it stopped him in his tracks and he couldn't go any further. And at that moment, he looked around and he saw either a pair of gray pants or a jacket. It's a little confusing, different tellings of the story about what it was he saw. But he saw a piece of clothing and these items were around, so it's not like he made this part up. So he steps off the path in the direction of the clothing, and in the water nearby, which he described as a little lake, he sees a body covered by a piece of wood, and he immediately knew it was Michelle. At this point in his testimony, the state asks him whether he ever told Jim Anderson, as well as a number of police officers, that a calling from God led him to the spot. Leo said, and this is Leo Sr., said he was so upset that day he didn't know what he said. Now, the state would call various people, including Mrs. Anderson, who more or less confirmed the story of the headaches and Schofield's belief that they were a message from God. A detective, Richard Ketchadorian, also called the family to offer his condolences and said that Leo Sr. had told him that he had a premonition that allowed him to find the body. And the state prosecutor, Aguero, just could not get past this. He really believed that the reason Leo found the body is because he knew where the body was, either because he put it there or he knew where his son had put it. And this story of God sort of directing him to the body was just a cover. I'm really interested, Alice, what you think about this. Whether you think this is as striking as John Aguero thought it was.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
This is a mini meditation guided by Bombas. Repeat after me. I'm comfy. I'm cozy. I have 0 blisters on my toes. And that's because I wear Bombas, the softest socks, underwear, and t-shirts that give back. One purchased equals one donated. Now go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
So, as an advocate from the prosecutor's perspective, heck yes, I'm going to pounce all over this type of testimony. Are you kidding? This sells itself to the jury. I point to Leo, who's sitting as the defendant, and I said, and you know how we found his wife who was stabbed 26 times? God led him there. I mean, you can see how you can just be ripped to shreds. Except it's almost like God knew we were going to have this recording tonight. Because did you read the article in the paper today, Brett? I can't make this up. This came in the paper today. A little boy, 4-year-old boy, Phoenix Wilkerson, you can go Google this article right now if you're watching live, had been missing for 50 hours in the woods, and it's obviously very cold. We started this episode with saying that it's getting to kind of sub-zero temperatures, and he's nonverbal, and I think he had just been playing in his front yard. His mom turned around to say something to someone in their house and turned around, and he was gone. And they've been searching the woods for him. His house is surrounded by woods. They couldn't find him. And there have been search parties looking for the past couple of days with absolutely no success. And there's no indication that there was foul play. He just is nonverbal, wandered off into the woods, and we've talked about how difficult it is to find someone in the woods. This guy, who is not related to the Wilkersons at all, heard about this boy missing. He lives an hour away, and his wife told him, like, we should go help search for this boy. And the man said, no, like, I'm not going to go search for a boy that I don't know anything about. And he went to church, and he said that while he was in church, God spoke to him, this is all in the article, and said, you need to go search for that boy. So he got in his car, drove an hour, joined a search party, and he was walking through the woods. He said, God kept saying, you're getting closer, you're getting closer. And then no one had been able to find this kid for almost 3 days. And he said, God told me to turn around. And he saw in the leaves, in like the tall grass, you couldn't see it unless you were looking for him, was the boy laying down in the grass. And he called out to him, and the boy moved, and he was fine. He's been saved now. He's been saved in the last 24 hours. And this whole article literally is over and over. The last words of this article is, I'm so glad God sent me. No one thinks he did anything wrong because he has no ties to the family. There's no indication the child had any foul play as to how he disappeared. And this is all being hailed as like a phenomenal miracle that God sent this man to find this little boy, and he is now safe at home thanks to a message from God. So I would, before reading that article, I would have been like, this is ridiculous. Whether it's true or not, I can see why the prosecutors seized on it. because it seems too suspect. But then I read this article.
Yeah, I read the trial transcript, and I listened to the description of this on Bone Valley, and people talk about it in Bone Valley. And I just thought, I have no idea why people took this the way they did. Because having grown up in Alabama in the 80s, the idea that it would be unusual for anybody to say that God told them to do anything is just blows my mind. I mean, I remember, I remember in high school, my friend and I were going to the gym. We asked one of our other friends, "Hey, you want to go to the gym with us?" And he was like, "Well, I'll pray about it." And I was like, "Well, I don't know that God really cares whether you go to the gym or not. I mean, I'm not, maybe he does, but it's so ingrained in Southern culture that to me, I was just surprised that anybody thought this was unusual. I mean, whether it doesn't matter whether you think God showed him the body or not. It's just him saying that doesn't strike me as unusual at all. I mean, the fact he found the body is obviously suspicious and is a reason to be suspicious of him. But him saying that, he got a message from God, sort of Blues Brothers styles, to go there, or he had the headache and it stopped him. I mean, to me, it just seemed so typical of the kind of thing you would hear from people that I was surprised at how many people from the area seemed to think this was unusual. And I think it's just one of those things where once you decide someone is guilty, it's kind of like when you're in a relationship and it goes bad and everything the other person does annoys you. I think it's the same thing. Once you decide somebody's guilty, everything you hear makes you think they're guilty, even if normally those are the kind of things you would say. I mean, everybody on that jury at one point or another had said something along those lines. That God had done this or God had done that, or someone in their life had said that, and they never questioned it. So I just thought it was really strange that everybody was so worked up about him saying this.
And that's why I said it was very important that the jury was primed to want to see something bad, right? That's why this is really good storytelling on behalf of the prosecution. You believed that this horrific murder, whoever did this, what a sad, sad last few moments for Michelle's life. She was stabbed in the back. She did not see this coming. And while she was alive and could have survived those wounds, she was flipped over, watching her attacker finish her. I mean, it is about as horrific as you can imagine in terms of being murdered, right? So that's what she's facing. You have to be able to believe that the person who's sitting facing those charges is capable of doing something like that. And with all of that testimony, the jury is primed to be like, you know what? A guy who can punch his wife in the stomach that hard, kick her, drag her out by the hair, can do something as horrific as this. Whether it's true or not, I'm saying this is why the storytelling is so important, because you can hear the exact same testimony and think, what? You heard God? That's how you found the body? Versus if we had been hearing on some podcast about Mother Teresa and how she had been praying for these children who were, had terminal illnesses, and she was treating all these people with leprosy, and one little child with leprosy had, walked off, and he needed to be treated because if he were found on the streets, they would end him because of his disease. And she prayed and she heard God lead her to this child. None of us would bat an eye. We'd be like, of course, Mother Teresa heard God and found this child and saved the child's life. So it totally matters what you're primed in your storytelling to be. And here's the thing. When I went to go, I just put the article in the chat to show you I'm not making this story up, that it really just was published today. When I went to go search for this article, I just put in man finds missing boy God. And a dozen articles came up from the past few years, because I don't think this is a trope that is not often revisited. There are movies about this. About God. Is it The Shack about this? Where God tells him where to go? The Shack is an award-winning book and was made into a movie with a lot of famous people. It's a devastating, terribly sad book and movie. But I'm pretty sure in that book, they can't find the little girl who's been murdered. And it's God telling them where to go. And they find the shack where the murder had happened. So that's
yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. Signs. The whole point of science is that God this thing happens to them. Well, I guess I'm giving it all away, but this thing happens to the main character's wife, and she says something that he thinks is just completely random, but at the end of the day, it ends up saving his kids because of what she says and how he applies it. That'll be my vague way of saying it in case you haven't seen Signs, which is a great movie that makes no sense, but just don't think about it as you're watching it, and you'll enjoy it. And then later on, you'll think about how it doesn't make any sense. But nevertheless, yeah, it happens all the time. Now, it didn't help that Leo's dad wouldn't shut up about it. And he talked about it a lot, and he's told it in a lot of different ways. He said other things like when he found Michelle, she was smiling at him because he just, which he interpreted her as being glad that they had found her or something. I mean, it's just stuff like that. And Leo's dad, as we're going to talk about later, is a real scumbag. But so... yeah, like all of that just for Aguero, for the prosecutor, for the state, convinced him, like, the family did this. And a little unclear about which one did it, whether it was Leo Sr. or Leo Jr. And we're going to talk about that more later and some ethical quandaries that you may consider. But really, just from that point on, he couldn't get past it. And I think that's why when they're talking about this case, this comes out very early. So you've got the abuse by Leo Jr. and you've got the message from God by Leo Sr. And the prosecution, there's circumstantial evidence and there's like, I mean, I don't know how to describe this. It's just setting a scene where we don't have a whole lot of evidence, like direct, and I don't mean this in someone saw it, but
I call it storytelling.
It is storytelling.
Like it is problematic for the prosecution from my personal perspective, because we know the defense is all about storytelling because all they have to do is show reasonable doubt. But when it's not circumstantial evidence, it's not direct evidence, it's not evidence, it's just storytelling, I begin to get the heebie-jeebies because the prosecution needs to prove its case with evidence, not good storytelling.
And this is a storytelling case. I mean, it really is. And it's going to continue not just the prosecution telling stories, but some witnesses are going to tell some stories as well that are going to tie all this up together for the jury. But right now, you've got a jury who really is primed to think the worst about Leo and his family. And it's important that the jury not trust Leo's father. Because remember, what is Leo's alibi? It's his family. His family is going to give him the alibi. So if you don't trust Leo Sr., then automatically you're open to discarding the alibi altogether. And that opens up the timeline for you and allows Leo to have committed this crime.
Yeah, I think we'll revisit this again. But, you know, Bone Valley spends a lot of time on the prosecution not being able to look past this. Just in general, as a prosecutor, I don't like it. And I at least never admit to it. If there's one piece of evidence I can't look past, unless it's something like the gun was in his pants. I can't look past that. I think I have pretty good reason not to look past the fact that the gun was in his pants. So I think I have a lot beyond reasonable doubt to be able to convict him for felon in possession, for example. But when it's something like the story rubbed me the wrong way and I can't look past that, I myself challenge myself and think, why can't I look past it? Because if it's not something that I can rebut with evidence, because there isn't. What is the counter evidence that you could be given to rebut that story? So let's talk about things that we can touch in terms of evidence. And that is Leo's clothes. Based on the autopsy, we already know that the murder was vicious and the wounds would have resulted in a lot of blood. Now, the defense noted something unusual, which is very worth noting, and it's that Leo never changed his clothes. I think this is not rebutted by anybody. I think there's a lot of people who see Leo throughout that night and beyond. So the clothes he was wearing before he supposedly killed Michelle were the same clothes he was wearing after she was killed. In fact, he didn't change his clothes for 2 days. And there was no blood at all on his clothes. With the viciousness of that murder, not to even have a drop of blood end up on you is very unlikely. And the whole not changing clothes for 2 days, you would think the first thing you'd do if you murdered someone is to try and cover it up. And what's kind of one of the first thing people do? Change their clothes, right? We always talk about the perpetrator ran from the crime scene and then we found their bag with bloody shirts dumped into the trash can along his escape route, right? Because that's like the first thing you do is you assume there's DNA on you. especially this kind of a murder. It was a very personal murder. It was a stabbing, meaning you had to be touching Michelle, and the blood, based on how close you were, likely would have splashed back up to you even if it's naked to the eye. But with that amount of blood, 2.5 liters, it probably was not naked to the eye. So not only did Leo, if he were the perpetrator, not do the first thing that anyone thinks about when they're trying to cover up something wrong they've done, which is change their clothes, he didn't change his clothes for 2 days. And this actually makes a lot of sense to me. If he is that distraught, the last thing he's thinking about is like hygiene and changing. All he cares about is finding Michelle. So it's not weird to me if he's innocent that he hasn't changed. But if he is guilty, it's very weird to me that he hasn't changed, and even more so, there's no blood on him whatsoever.
Yeah, and as we're going through this, we always try and sort of jerk you guys back and forth with evidence of guilt and evidence of innocence. And this is pretty good evidence for Leo. It's not as if it's impossible that he could kill someone, stab someone, and not get any blood on him. That would be pretty hard. I mean, there's 20-something stab wounds, a lot of blood's flying over the place. It's remarkable that he didn't get any blood on those clothes, if he didn't. But I think Alice makes a really subtle point. Even if you assume he could have done it and not got any blood on him, he would not necessarily have known that. And he wouldn't necessarily have trusted the fact that he didn't have blood that he was just missing. And the fact that he doesn't change clothes when you think that would be the first thing he would do, even if magically he didn't get any blood on him, that's seems to me to be pretty significant. It's a pretty significant thing that he made no effort to hide evidence. That's a consciousness of guilt type thing that you would do. Change clothes would be one of the first things you would do. Certainly before you saw anybody, and just in case, you looked at yourself, you didn't see the blood, but there's a splash of blood on your back, where you can't necessarily see it, and someone sees it and that does you in. And I don't know, I think this is pretty good for Leo.
And one thing, you may be thinking he's somehow able to be stabbing her from afar. Remember, she was turned over from her back. So the person who was stabbing her actually had to manhandle her body to turn it around. And in that process, there's probably already a lot of blood on the ground from being stabbed in the back. There's the issue of the person having shoes, right? The autopsy, everything is pointing to her being stabbed very close to where she's dumped. So let's say it's not on her clothes. Somehow, let's say Leo had on a poncho. By the way, if someone I knew very close to myself and they were abusive towards me came at me all of a sudden with a poncho on, I'd be like, oh my goodness, what are you doing, right? So he'd have to look different. Let's say he somehow had a poncho on. But his shoes, unless he had on booties, work booties to cover his shoes, the blood is all over around her. And she was seeping blood as she was being stabbed from the front as well. So there's just a lot of blood that's happening that is somehow escaping his clothes.
And every telling of this story, and I mean, as we've said in the Adnan case, just because the prosecution has a theory doesn't mean that theory is correct. But their theory, based on the evidence they're going to present, is that this is a fight that turned into a murder. This was a spur-of-the-moment thing. So it's not as if he planned it. He didn't build a kill room to do this where he would not leave any blood behind. During the murder itself, he would not have been thinking about avoiding this kind of thing. It would have been something he would have thought about immediately afterwards. So, I don't know. This, like I said, been a lot of bad evidence for Leo. This one is pretty good, and it comes up in the trial, but frankly, if there's a failing in the defense, I would have pounded this into the ground. And they bring it up, and it's mentioned, but it doesn't seem like it's something that the jury necessarily grabbed onto very hard.
So there's other stuff that's not good for Leo at trial. So Vince Rainer testified that he'd seen Leo with a knife before. Not good because Michelle was stabbed with a knife. Now, Vince also testified that Bobby Levins told him that while he was helping Leo change a tire, Bobby saw a knife he kept in the car and asked Leo about it. And Leo joked this was his equalizer. Later on, the knife was missing, and Vince describes it as disappearing without a trace. Now, those of you who have been with us for a while, whether on the prosecutor's podcast or in legal briefs, I hope alarm bells are going off in your head. Because you may be thinking, wait a second, if Bobby's the one who saw Leo with the knife and Leo told Bobby that the knife was his equalizer, Bobby's not the one testifying. Vince is testifying about what Bobby is saying. Why can he do that? Because isn't that classic hearsay? And you are correct, and you've just graduated Prosecutors University. And here's the weird thing. It's not clear why Vince is allowed to testify about what Bobby heard Leo say, because this is hearsay. Now, here's the thing about hearsay, and we do this all the time in trial. It is allowed in unless, like, someone objects to it. So if people testify about hearsay all the time, and you kind of have to pick your battles. But if Edmonds, the defense counsel, isn't objecting to it, and the judge isn't really paying attention, you can imagine this just gets slipped by. And this is a really big slip, though. There's no indication that Bobby Levins is dead, so he can't come. There's no indication that Bobby can't be subpoenaed to appear to talk about this. Remember, we've talked about some exceptions to hearsay. None of that seems to be present here, and there doesn't seem to be like an objection fight over whether Vince can talk about this. And for Leo's part, he will take the stand and he'll testify that he never had a knife in his car. So what you have here, what the jury's hearing, is competing testimony, right? Someone they've been told is very violent, whose dad had a message from God about finding his murdered wife conveniently when no one else could find her, who said he didn't have a knife. And then you have, at least through this testimony, two people who say that Leo even jokes about having a knife, calling it his equalizer. That's a pretty violent thing to say, right? Like, you're saying you can equalize people with your knife, right? It's not for opening mail, for example. So in the jury's mind, they had these competing testimonies. Which one do you think they're primed to believe? These two guys who don't have violent pasts that we know of, who have no reason to lie, of course. Why would they lie about him having this equalizer knife? And of course, Leo's going to take the stand and say he didn't have a knife. They're going to believe Vince's testimony.
And I just got to say, nitpicking when defense attorneys object and don't object is fool's errand. But this was really important. This is not some minor statement. And if you read the trial transcript, they object about minor statements all the time. This is a really big deal. A guy told me that he saw Leo with a knife, and Leo told that guy who told me that he used it as his equalizer. I mean, that should never have come in.
By the way,
ever.
Even if you were sleeping, the second I hear someone say, some guy told me, I'm like, objection! Like you don't even know what they said, you just say objection.
Right, and make the prosecutor explain it. What exactly is your exception? If somebody in the chat mentioned it's a statement of a party opponent, yeah, if Bobby Levins testified, it would be a statement of party opponent. This is double hearsay. It's Leo's statement to Bobby, and then Bobby's statement to Vince, and Vince is relaying what Leo told Bobby. Unless Bobby is dead, and this was like his dying declaration. Leo told me about the knife. Like, this never should have come in.
And here's the thing, those of you who haven't been on all our hearsay conversations, the reason is because Bobby should be able to be cross-examined about what he actually heard. If Bobby testified and he said, Leo told me this, correct, statement of a party opponent. That's not hearsay. But then the defense counsel can get up and cross-examine Bobby and say, what context did he say that to you? Did he use the word equalizer? Are you sure you heard him? Are you sure you saw a knife? Was he joking about something else? Did he say he was holding? How do you know that was a knife? How did you know it's called an equalizer? I mean, there are so many questions. At the very least, I've never seen an effective cross-examination do nothing. At the very least, it gets everyone so confused that you're like, I don't know what just happened, right? An effective cross-examination may not be that you get the witness to backtrack what they've said. It could be as simple as just marring the situation so that the jury no longer has any idea what you're talking about. Well, did he also have a pen? What about some notebooks? I hear that he really likes playing guitar. How many guitar picks were there? I mean, the whole point is just to confuse the situation. But Bobby's not there to be cross-examined. And that's why the hearsay rule exists, because he has a right, he being Leo, has a right to confront his accusers.
And just imagine all those same questions asked of Vince. If his answer would be, I don't know. No idea. Why? Because he wasn't there when the statement was made. And to allow him to bring that now uncross-examinable statement in is so unfair and was a huge blunder by the defense. Now, I think all y'all out there thinking, Is that ineffective assistance of counsel? Probably not, because to be ineffective, it's got to be really bad.
It's probably not enough for a mistrial. Like we talked about constitutional rights, and some of you have, you're starting to think about all these hypotheticals. I love your desire to find a way where it was okay. Sometimes, by the way, guys, there are just mistakes in trial. Some of you are like, but what if he was with Bobby when Leo said that? Then he wouldn't have to say Leo told Bobby. He would have said Leo said to us. Even if the message was directed at Bobby, he heard it and can answer questions about it. We were in the same room. I know I could have heard because I don't have any hearing problems, and he said it pretty loudly over the roar of the engine, etc. He can be cross-examined about it. So that's not hearsay in that instance, even if the message is directed at someone else. If he hears it with his own ears, it's not.
The next one blew my mind
How is this okay? This one I don't understand.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I know we haven't even told you guys what it is, but when we heard about this in Bone Valley, I had to pause it and think, wait, how is this allowed?
I thought they got it wrong. When they started talking about it on Bone Valley, I was like, these people, they don't know what they're talking about, right? But let me tell you what it is. So we've been talking about the jury and how the jury found Leo guilty. And sometimes, you'll hear lawyers when they get all fired up say something about 12 citizens, good and true, found this person guilty after they consider the evidence. 12 people did not find Leo Schofield guilty of this crime. In fact, 11 people did not find Leo Schofield guilty of this crime. 10 people found Leo guilty of this crime. So let me explain to you how this happened. When the jury was selected, the venire wasn't big enough to have any alternates. So they picked 12 jurors with no alternates. And so when Bone Valley initially said that, I was like, well, guys, the alternates can't deliberate anyway. This is not a real issue. The problem is, by the time it was over, 2 of those 12 people dropped off for various reasons. So the final jury was only made up of 10 people. And look, so in the federal system, you can have a jury of 11 if everybody agrees on it. So if you go through your alternates and you lose a person, the parties get together, they can decide, we will move forward with 11. Less than that, it's over. If you have fewer people than 11, you're done, no matter what you want to do. Apparently in Florida, you can agree to move forward. And reading the trial part of this, when we came to this, I was just shocked at how they're like, basically Jack Edmonds is like, no objection, Your Honor, it's fine.
It was so flippant. It wasn't even a discussion. That's the crazy part. The crazy part about what Vince testified to with Bobby is that there was no discussion, no fight about it. It's not like there were arguments on both sides and the judge said, I'm going to let it in. It's not like the defense was like, we cannot have a jury of 10. I don't care if it's unanimous. He gets the right to 12 jurors. And we have a mistrial because clearly it's not going great for him, right? You always want a mistrial because it's going to, as the defendant, because it's not guilty, right? Unless for some reason you think it's going to be acquittal, you're almost always going to want a mistrial because the time to bring a case again to trial takes resources. Witnesses forget things. People don't want to take the stand again. It gets very messy the further from the time of crime that your trial is. And so make them jump through the hoops and do another trial. The fact that this was not even brought up as a point of contention is mind-blowing.
And the thing is, it's an automatic mistrial. All the defense would have had to have done is object and say, Your Honor, we cannot move forward with 10 jurors. We let it go when it was 11. We were trying to be flexible. We cannot move forward with 10 jurors. And if he had said that and the judge had moved forward, guess what? If he's found guilty, he's going to win on appeal. It's like an automatic win.
Appeal issue.
But once you agree to
That's why you ask for these things, by the way, to preserve them for appeal too. It's one thing if the judge rules against you, but if you don't raise it, it's not an issue.
Yeah. Once you waive it, it's done. You can't appeal it anymore unless you do it on ineffective assistance of counsel. And the problem, this is a strategic decision. So just doing this, the reason you would do it if you're a lawyer is because, as Alice said, you think it's going so well for you that you're going to win. So you don't want a mistrial because whether it's 10 or 9 or 6, you're going to win. You don't need one juror because you've already got 10 on your side. And because of that, basically, if a lawyer makes a strategic decision, you can almost never be found ineffective for a strategic decision because they're just not going to question you. So in Jack Edmonds' mind, apparently, when they got to this point, he just thought, I mean, a couple things. His client is in jail. He is being held in jail. He's been held in jail this whole time. So if there's a mistrial, he's going to spend more time in jail while they're getting another jury together. And I get that. But this is for the guy's life. This is a death penalty case. That's another thing. Not only are these 10 people going to decide whether or not he's guilty, they're going to decide whether or not he gets the death penalty. And just the idea that you wouldn't, I don't know.
Having read the transcript of the first half of the prosecution's case with all of the violent testimony about Leo, I don't see how anyone could think this is going well for Leo. And at the very least, I would want a mistrial so that I could bring up to the judge again how all that testimony was duplicative and we do not need 20 witnesses testifying about how violent Leo was. We can agree that they will all testify to it and only have 3 people take the stand. I don't see how you can sit through that trial and think it's going great for my client. Like, super violent guy, but like definitely didn't murder his wife. Absolutely not. I mean, it is devastating testimony that is on the stand day after day after day, witness after witness after witness. And if I'm sitting there thinking, whoops, I really made an oopsie there because I did not try to exclude any of these witnesses. Mistrial so I can do it the next time around. My second time around is going to be better because I know what they're going to say. And I'm either going to do my own research into their backgrounds to better cross-examine them and to undercut what they heard or did not hear. By the way, that can be effective because what if the person testifying is very violent themselves? Maybe they're the violent one talking about what they did, not Leo. But you may not know that. Or just file a motion that this is all cumulative. Get it out. It's way too prejudicial because it is really prejudicial.
I don't understand this one, guys. You know, I will often defend defense attorneys who are attacked for making decisions. This one was dumb. There is no, if you're out there and you're a defense attorney and you've won a case with 10 jurors, write into us and explain your thinking because, or if you're a prosecutor and you've won a case with 10 jurors, I would just like to know, is there any other case where 10 jurors made this decision?
For the death penalty.
Yeah, for the death penalty.
This is not even for a close to death penalty case. This is not a murder case. Brett and I have chosen juries where there is we have an alternate, but because it's long enough of a trial and the judge really wants 2 or 3 alternates, that we have decided not to go forward with trial and we will call back a new veneer in a month so that more people will come because it was the holidays or whatever and strike a new jury so we can have enough alternates. That's happened in real life where we don't even go forward with the trial without enough alternates.
And the circumstances where that happen is exactly what happened here. They called the veneer, which is the group of people who are going to be selected. They had multiple trials going on. So by the time they got down to this, you know, they really only had like 12 qualified jurors. So that's the other thing. It wasn't like there was a lot of choosing going on here for who was going to be on the jury. It was these people or nothing, essentially. And I just can't imagine. The whole thing is mind-blowing. And there used to be states where you could actually convict with, I think, 10. Like you could have a 10-2 verdict. You can't do that anymore. But even that was for like, you know, petty crimes and stuff. I can't imagine a death penalty case where you're going to be able to convict somebody with 10 jurors. It's just, I don't know. And the crazy thing is,
as the prosecution, I also don't want that for appeal purposes.
Right. If there'd been 12, they couldn't have 10-2 guilty. You know, like, so you're just giving the prosecution an advantage because now they only have to convince 10 people, not 12. I don't know. The whole thing blows my mind. I don't know. I can't imagine doing this.
This is worth harping on because I agree with you. When I heard it on Bone Valley, I was like, no, they must have gotten it wrong. Like, they're just they're not lawyers, so they didn't really read the transcript right. There weren't 10 jurors. That can't be what happened. And it is. We're telling you, Bone Valley got it right. I'm still just shocked. Even if you believe he is rightfully convicted, this is very troublesome. Very troublesome. And also there's like no recourse now because it's been waived.
Let's start with the Andersons. We've talked about the Andersons a lot. Buddy Anderson was in the band, and Jim Anderson was actually Leo's boss. And he's going to testify, and it's not going to go well for Leo. He would testify that Leo had told him that he had a feeling Michelle was dead the day after she went missing. Now, later on,
By the way,
cross-examination,
statement of the party opponent, that's okay
That
because
is okay.
Leo told Jim directly.
Right. If he said, somebody told me that Leo told them, then you got a problem. So now in cross-examination, he's going to say he wasn't entirely sure about the days, but she's found a couple days later. So this very well could be the case. And it's consistent with other things that both Leo and others have said, that Leo just had a really bad feeling about this. And this is obvious from the night of. He had a really bad feeling about this even before the time that the state believes he committed this murder. So it's not surprising that he might have said this to Jim, but at trial, it comes across as a very sort of, the reason he said that is because he knew that, in fact, she was dead. But that's not the only thing Leo said. He told Jim that if she were dead, the police would try and pin it on him since he was the husband. Now, everybody in true crime would probably make that statement too, because we all know the husband is the first person you look at. And once again, this relationship's not exactly rock solid. 1987, I doubt Leo was listening to true crime, so maybe it's a little bit more suspicious that he would say something like that. Leo also said something else that was problematic, that he said if Michelle were dead, he hoped she wasn't found in water. And as a matter of fact, she was. So the fact that Leo said he thought she was dead, he hoped she wouldn't be found in water, seems to indicate that sort of prior knowledge in the same way that Leo Sr. finding the body indicated prior knowledge. And Anita, who was Jim Anderson's wife, would testify that Leo had told her the same thing about finding the body in water and that he hoped that wouldn't be the case.
So when I first heard that, I was like, that is a weird thing to say. Like, why so specifically water? You know, is Michelle like really afraid of water, whatnot? It didn't really make sense to me until I thought about where we are, which is Florida, and the presence of like alligators in the waters. I can imagine that becomes kind of a worry. And we know that when people have loved ones pass away, they care about their bodies, right? Like they don't want their bodies to have been eaten by vultures, for example. Like it's like insult upon insult on injury. What is it?
Adding insult to injury. And the fact is, Leo and his family were looking. I mean, that's what they were looking for her. I mean, they thought if they were going to find her, it'd be in water. So I don't know. I don't know if it's necessarily as bad as people might make it out to be. Now, Anita had another little tidbit of information that she shared that I think probably did make Leo look worse. She testified that Leo started dating a week or so after Michelle was buried. So that's not great. And you're going to hear there's several people who say things similar to that, and Leo's going to address it in his own testimony later on, that Leo moved on fairly quickly from Michelle. And according to some people, he may have moved on before she was even dead. In addition to this, Jim would further testify that when Leo spoke to Michelle at 9:45, he was upset that she hadn't already come to get him. This is actually consistent with statements by Leo that he and Michelle often fought over the fact that she was slow to come pick him up when she was supposed to. And Anderson would testify to this as well, that he had seen Leo upset when Michelle was late to pick him up. Now, Leo said that the fact that Michelle called him was actually made him happy, because usually she just would show up whenever she showed up and she would give him no indication of when she was going to pick him up. So from Leo's perspective, he was wondering where she was during that period and may have been getting irritated, but when she called him, he thought, this is good. Thank you for calling me and letting me know you were cleaning the house, you're letting out the dog, and now you're going to come get me. So I don't know what to make of Jim Anderson's statement there, and it's hard to say if this is one of those things where Anderson is thinking back to prior events and not necessarily what was happening that night. Anderson had a few weird things he talked about, though. For one thing, he said that Leo went to work the next morning, the morning after Michelle went missing, which I think would present to the jury as strange if Leo was so concerned about Michelle. Now, Anderson would say that Leo didn't stay very long, choosing instead to go look for Michelle. This is a weird statement by Anderson, as it's almost certain that Leo did not go to work with him that day. In fact, he was meeting with police that morning, and the initial police report with Anderson, we always talk about, go back to the initial sources, he did not include this detail. So when he first talked to police, he didn't say that Leo went to work with him that day, and based on the timeline and when Leo was meeting with people, he probably didn't. Not all of Anderson's testimony was bad for Leo. He said that the next day, Leo was completely distraught to the point he was disoriented in a place he knew well. So it wasn't as if the whole thing was bad for Leo, but it wasn't great testimony.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this is going into the character that the jury is being led to believe about Leo, especially this whole moving on, quickly. Of course, the kind of unspoken narrative there is that he wanted to get rid of Michelle because he wanted to be with other people. And in general, of course, dating within a week of burying your wife is not necessarily indicative of guilt. There could be lots of issues there, but it's not a great look, right? We talked about this in the Scott Peterson, Lacey Peterson case, that Scott Peterson was calling his mistress from her vigil, and that was very bad in conjunction with everything else. So you're seeing kind of the fact that Leo can be so violent towards Michelle and he can move on so quickly seems to not jive with his own words that he is so worried about her starting from that night, that he can't change his clothes, that, he doesn't go to sleep all night. He files these police reports because he cared so much. It begins to insert doubt into your mind like, well, did he do those things because he was guilty, or he wanted to make sure that no one found out he was guilty so that he could then go out and live whatever playboy life that he wanted? But this isn't great. Anderson Sr.'s testimony is just not great for Leo, kind of like a lot of the testimony we've heard so far. And so that does lead to the question of, how was Leo and Michelle's marriage? Because so far it doesn't sound so great. They hadn't been married that long. And Michelle McCluskey, Michelle Schofield's best friend, testified that a month or two before the murders, she had been talking to Leo, and he told her that while he loved Michelle, he didn't want to be married to her anymore, and he'd give her anything if she would just leave. The testimony at the trial established that Leo had planned on moving back to Massachusetts, and this is something he really did do after Michelle died. In conversation with others about this plan, Leo said Michelle wasn't going with him. Now, Anderson Sr. testified that it wasn't long before Leo seemed to move on from Michelle, as we heard. And he said that in the days after Michelle's funeral, Leo was already going out to clubs and dating multiple women. And after Leo moved to Massachusetts, Leo actually asked Anderson Sr. to help him bring a woman back with him to Florida, someone who was actually strangely a cousin of Leo's. So this was about a month after Michelle's murder. And now we're beginning to understand why there's a lot going on with Anderson Sr. He's Leo's boss. He's obviously Buddy's father. He knows a lot about what's going on. But we're beginning to see maybe why he has other bad feelings towards Leo that may or may not have anything to do with him dating. And that's that, remember, Leo and Michelle don't have a lot of money. They share one car. They don't have a phone at their trailer. They are barely making ends meet. And now that Michelle is dead, there has to be a funeral. Funerals cost a lot of money. And that was not money they had. So Anderson Sr. was the one who raised money for Michelle's funeral. Money he testified Leo later asked him if he would give to him, saying that Michelle would want him to have it. So Anderson is clearly bitter. He had taken care of Michelle's funeral, and he testified that once Leo and his father moved back to Massachusetts, it was as if they had simply forgotten about what was going on in Florida. This is the story from Anderson. We get, of course, a slightly different story from Leo, because it sounds pretty bad that he's already moving in with a woman and trying to move her from Massachusetts to Florida. But Leo would take the stand and testify that he'd stayed with a married cousin of his while in Massachusetts, but there was no relationship with her. That this cousin eventually left her husband and had asked Leo if she and her child could stay with him in Florida while she got her feet under her. That may be what it is. It sounds very plausible. Leo didn't have that much money. If he's moving up to Massachusetts, I can imagine he's trying to crash on someone's couch.
And look, this is why rumor, innuendo, and speculation is not typically allowed in trial. Anderson he doesn't know whether Leo is in a relationship with a cousin in Massachusetts. He lives in Florida. It's not like they had Facebook. They're not making it Facebook official. They didn't even have instant messenger. They barely had telephones back then. This is like the horse and buggy age. So this notion that Anderson, he's heard some rumors about Leo is what's happened here. And he's testifying as if this is fact that Leo's in a relationship with a cousin. I don't know, maybe he was. But this is also a perfectly plausible explanation that he stayed with a cousin and that cousin needed help and Leo's trying to get her help. He's not trying to bring the cousin back because he is romantically involved with her. He's trying to help her and her kid. Either one of those could be true. We don't know which one's true. So probably this is the kind of thing that shouldn't come in at a trial about whether or not someone murdered someone. You know, the stuff about him going out on dates afterwards, you know, maybe that's more relevant. But this whole cousin thing just feels very irrelevant to me. The relevance objection here would have been pretty good. So it's speculative. This is all speculative. This is speculation. He doesn't know. There's no firsthand knowledge here of Leo dating this woman. So this is the kind of thing that really should never have come in. And it's a very minor point, but it's the kind of minor point that you could imagine at least one or two jurors hear this and they're like, oh, that's icky. Even more reason to think this is the kind of guy who would murder his wife.
Now, we've given Leo's lawyer a lot of flack so far in today's episode, but I will say on cross-examination, he did do some good things with Anderson. And he brought out that Anderson, you know, he's talking about all these things. He's the father of Buddy Anderson. That's where Leo was that night. He is the boss, you know, for Leo. He helped raise funds for Michelle's funeral. It really sounds like Anderson is deeply enmeshed in Leo's life, knows him better than anybody else. So if he's saying these things about Leo, you can trust Anderson, right? That's what it sounds like from his testimony. But Jack Edmond, Leo's lawyer, brings out that Anderson probably actually wasn't as close to Leo as he made it out to be. He'd also been his boss, but he'd actually fired Leo from his job a week after Michelle was killed. And Edmund was also able to show that while Anderson seemed to remember all the dates that were bad for Leo, he remembered basically no other dates of when things happened. This is a pretty common tactic in cross-examination, by the way, because you are bringing out the fact that the person on the stand has a narrative they're trying to push, that Leo is bad, and they're not trying to remember anything that's good for them. So, because they're biased, jury, you shouldn't put weight into everything they have to say. So this was good. This was good cross-examining. As for Leo Sr., he said that the relationship between the two was excellent. He described it as puppy love, like they'd just been married right up to the day she died. Now, this is not great testimony. It may sound great for Leo, but we just heard from like 20 witnesses how badly he beat Michelle. And then for Leo Sr. to like kind of take a tone deaf testimony about how this was puppy love, like what kind of puppies are you talking about? This is like very not good. It's almost laughable based on all that's happened. Now, this is on the defense counsel because I think they invoked the rule in this case. Remember, we've talked about how witnesses are not supposed to listen to other witnesses testify because you don't want your own testimony affected by something that someone else has said. Even if you're trying to only tell the truth, when you hear the narrative, you begin to shape what you know based on what you've heard. So Leo Sr. may not have known about all this testimony. Let's say he didn't. Of course, I can imagine you're going to say how great your son is when you get on the stand. Everyone expects that of a father. But guess who knows what's been testified about? Jack Edmond, the defense attorney. He knows where the narrative is. And when he's prepping a witness to testify about his client, he needs to keep all that in mind. You change things on a day-to-day basis. When you're in trial, trial doesn't end when the gavel hits, the desk at the end of the trial day. From the moment that court is adjourned for that day, you go back with your witnesses for the next day and you reshape everything based on what's happened in trial that day. That's what happens every single day. This is why trial is so exhausting, because trial lasts for like 20 hours per day, because there's the 8 or 10 hours in court, and then there's the nonstop adjusting of your strategy afterwards. So to let Leo take the stand and be like, puppy love, you can imagine that the jury's going to say, I'm not going to believe anything you say, because that's clearly not puppy love. Yeah, and everything Leo Sr. said for Leo was bad. And he testified twice. He got called by both the prosecution and the defense. and it
It was just all bad because he does not come across as credible. And as I said, that is a problem for Leo because he is one of his alibis. And you can understand why he says these things. I mean, he's a dad. He's trying to help out, but this was not the approach to take. Now, I think we're going to stop for now, but I think you can see how muddy this trial was. Like, just how everything is mixed up now. You probably don't know what to think. Was Leo madly in love with Michelle and so concerned that something would have happened to her? Or did he not care about her at all? Was he, going to work the next day? He didn't even care about her, or was he not? There's so much that is confusing about this case. And I think the prosecution, this was their strategy. I think muddy the case. Usually the prosecution wants it to be clear because usually the prosecution has a whole lot of evidence on its side. So they want it to be clear because if you sit down and you really look at the evidence and you lay it out, you're going to be convinced. The only way you're going to think someone is innocent is if you can muddy the water and confuse the jury and just make it where they can't see the truth. Here, I think the prosecution is taking a different approach. They are muddying the water and trying to just undermine Leo as a person. And the reason they're doing that is because some of the testimony we're going to talk about next time, where you start to finally have people testify who have some direct information about the case. And it becomes really important that you believe those people, because if you believe them, you're going to believe Leo's guilty. And by setting this up where Leo and his credibility and his father's credibility is so weak, when these people come on, it is going to be really hard for Jack Edmond to undermine them on cross-examination, even though he actually does a pretty good job. As we're going to see, this is the one time where he kind of shines is with some of the prosecution's best witnesses. But unfortunately for him and for Leo, it almost feels like by this point it doesn't even matter, that the jury is so soured on Leo that he doesn't have much of a chance whether he did it or not. All right, well, we've gone long today, but we're still going to do a question because that's what we do. That's what we do. So if you're out there and you want to answer a question, go to Apple, leave a 5-star review, and we will answer it for you. Okay, let's see. We'll do a quick one today, Alice. Okay. If you could travel back in time to the Library of Alexandria, what literary character are you taking with you, and what section are you going to check out first?
Whoa.
I know.
I feel like I need to sit down and write
there.
a 1,500-word essay to answer that one. I don't know that I have an answer. I'm so tired right now.
I don't know who I would take back with me. That's a tough question. I think like Mark Twain. I'd take him back with me. So I feel like Mark Twain could do a lot with what's in the Library of Alexandria. And as a philosophy major, even though I can't read ancient Greek, just thinking about all the works of Plato and Socrates that were lost when the Library of Alexandria was lost, I think I would want to read all of that. That would be where I would go first, is the Greek philosophers.
This is going to be a cop-out answer, but a real answer. Like if I really got to go back today and I had to pick.
You've really got to
pick
go.
who I'd go back with. Brett, I'd totally go back with you because you probably know everything.
Oh.
And we would do a podcast on it.
That was so sweet.
And people would be like, remember when I was... It would be like a series. And you would be like, oh, yeah. What? I totally forgot. I do know ancient Greek. I wrote a horror novel about it. I just totally forgot about it because I went to bed and forgot.
See, you would be more likely to be the one who randomly knew ancient Greek. Like, it would not shock me if you're like, actually, I know ancient
had a
Greek.
mic and just walked around together? Because we have I think we have very different literary backgrounds just based on where we grew up and, that whole sort of thing, that we actually probably could cover a good bit of that and teach each other a lot. Whereas I don't know what to ask Mark Twain.
Okay, that would be awesome. I'm changing my answer. Forget Mark Twain. Taking you.
All right, next podcast.
You convinced me. Yes. All right. Well, that's all we got for today. Really interested to know what you guys think about this case. prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Send us your thoughts, your suggestions about what you want us to cover. Hit us up on Facebook, the gallery. There have been lots of great discussions about this case there. I hope you guys have joined. If you can't find it, which some people can't, send me an email. I will send you the link. Twitter, join us there. If you're watching on YouTube, hello to all our YouTube folks. And thank you so much to our patrons who are with us today, asking great questions and providing great thoughts, even as we record these episodes. All right, Alice, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
This case really does have so many twists and turns. I will say a lot of people request cases where they want us to cover it because they think there are a lot of twists and turns, and once you dig in, it seems pretty clear what the answer is. This is not that case. I mean, truly, this case has so many layers to it. It is not a slam dunk either way where we are in the trial transcript so far. So thank you for coming along the ride. Thank you for coming along for the ride. I hope you join us again for the next episode because my head is spinning after each of these episodes, and there's just so much more to discuss with you.
A lot of great stuff. So we can't wait for you to join us next week for that. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
Way Iceland is, there's just like one road. You can just stop. Like the Continental Divide is in lots of different places. You just stop. So it wasn't a tourist attraction. We literally pulled off on the side of the road and there was a little sign that said Continental Divide. I even think it said no swimming. But, you know, gotta do what you gotta do. When in Iceland.
Once. Yeah, exactly. When in Iceland, break the law.
Sorry, Iceland. I apologize.
Sorry, Iceland.
Okay. This is
back.
Anyway, so I can record this weekend if you want.
Okay.
I should be able to. I thought you were going to do a grandparent thing.
It's a good point. Lillian is saying I shouldn't do this because I was just sick. You're trying to kill me. Are you trying? Is you trying to get rid of me? You trying to push me out of the podcast?
Yeah.
You can take it over?
Yeah, I am.
That's it.
Okay, well then maybe I'll make her, because you know what? My boys really want to do it. I don't know if